Hello and welcome to this episode of the Superhero Ethics Podcast. Today we're starting a new series called On Page and Screen, in which we look at interesting questions and talk about how are they handled in the on-screen versions and how is that different from the comic book versions. And we're going to do this in partnership with Will and Steve, the two great guys from the Hype is My Superpower podcast. Will, you may remember, he was with us on the Falcon and Winter Soldier podcast. We've talked a lot about their stuff. They have great perspective on comic books, so the two of them, as well as myself and Paul Hoppy, today we're diving into the character of Daredevil and asking, how does he become a hero? How does he choose to become a hero, and what are the demons he has to overcome to do that? All that and more after a commercial break we have no control over. Welcome back. My name is Matthew. I'm your host. I'm joined as becoming semi-regular, but not an actual co-host, still a guest, Paul Hoppy. Paul, how are we doing today?
Pretty good. Yeah, I'm hyped for this episode.
Get it.
Also coming back was a regular during the Falcon and Winter Soldier days, and I promised him that was his contract with us is not up. We're still going to have to keep getting him on. Will Freeland. Will, how are you doing today?
Good, man. Just reading every single Marvel comic that I can find the time to consume.
I like it. And you've been podcasting for a while with your buddy Steve, who hasn't been on before, but was gracious enough to come on as well, so we can have both the guys from Hype is My Superpower. Steve, it's great to have you on.
Great to be here, man. I'm really excited. I heard you joke in one of your episodes with Will that sharing a podcast with you guys gets a body on a government watch list, but joke's on you. I've literally already been on one, so...
Nice. I am as well, so we'll have to compare stories about
Absolutely.
That
Sounds great.
I'm so glad to have all of us here, and I like this idea of talking about things, like I said, on screen and page, because, Paul and I have mostly, as well as my other guests, we mostly talk about the on-screen versions of these things. But especially when we're getting into the heart of who is the character and what's the character about, it's often really interesting to look at what is the comic book version. And Will and Steve, on your podcast, Hype is My Superpower, you really do great jobs of saying, like, okay, here's this character. How is the story, approached from this writer or that writer, or things like that? And so I was really excited for us to kind of dive into some of those questions. And the first one really is one that has been kind of, honestly, one of my favorite questions in sort of superhero media, and about probably my favorite example of superhero media, Daredevil. And, one of the central questions Daredevil wrestles with is, should I become a hero? And for him, it's not just the sort of like, do I have the responsibility or not? It's that I think he's really questioning his own motivations, at least in the show. He's really worried about, why do I want to do this? Do I want to do this because I'm trying to make the world a better place? Is it that, do I have to kill people? Can I do this without killing people? He talks about how the Murdock boys have the devil inside, and that he's trying to figure out what's his purpose and why does he do all this? What's your all kind of take on, we're going to get into specifics general, but just in general, how is that question addressed for Matt Murdock?
Steve, want to go first?
Oh, I want to go first? Okay. Yeah. So I came into this with I've been doing a little bit of thinking in preparation for this pod, and I came up with an answer that I didn't expect. Because there's a lot of aspects to Daredevil's character, right, that are kind of adjacent to heroing and justice, right? He's a lawyer. He is disabled. He's blind. He has, he's Catholic, and he has superpowers. And all of these things kind of like, blend together to make this mix of character traits. But in my own sort of understanding, and this is, just. I don't want to speak as an authority on the comics representation of Daredevil, because my reading of Daredevil in particular is not exhaustive by any means. And I kind of
we're never experts on this podcast.
Sure. But I kind of have a gonzo take on continuity within comics, which is it barely matters, and it's created through the repetition and through sort of this folkloric process of iteration. And so I think that, when you're talking about a character, who they are, you are bringing together a lot of these different sources, like, you know, film and TV adaptations. And in my mind, they sit with equal weight as comics. And it's just because the comics contradict themselves constantly. And if you're going to try and hold that as a single source of truth, you're going to drive yourself absolutely crazy, or you're going to become comic book guy in The Simpsons and be just completely miserable. So when I was kind of going through this stew of what makes Daredevil tick, why does he do what he does? You know, I came up with, it's not law. Law is a tool to him. He is a Catholic, and that's how he gets his morals, but that's not his motivation. To me, his motivation is his working class background, is identification with the little man, and you know, his dad being a boxer and down on his luck, and it's this sort of drive to protect Hell's Kitchen and the innocent and the people within it that really form his motivation, which is external to his ethics and external to his abilities.
I think that's pretty spot on. I mean, so I've read a lot of Daredevil, and for the vast majority of his time on page, he is always trying to do what's right for the little guy, to your point.
Right.
And in the stories where he starts to lose sight of that are when he needs another street level hero to kind of put him straight again. Like, there's one time where he starts to get possessed by, he gets chosen by, the 5 fingers of the hand to become a vessel for this demon that they want to revive, and so Daredevil becomes.
As you do.
Yeah, right. And so
this is in the. I don't see anything wrong with this situation.
This is in the Shadowland crossover,
right.
And Daredevil becomes the head of the hand, and he starts getting this twisted view of how to lord over Hell's Kitchen and not protect Hell's Kitchen. And that's when it takes, you know, a whole bunch of other city level heroes to be like, yo, you know, you're an idiot and go and fight whatever demons inside you, blah, 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 blah. And so I totally agree that there are other aspects to Matt that kind of help him fight for the little guy, whether it's his practice in law and knowing the law is inside and out, and you know what loopholes for tenants can he exploit to make sure that they don't get evicted, or if it's his Catholicism of, you know, always do, you know, protect thy neighbor and this, that, and the other, or if it's his knowing the limitations of his abilities. He can't fly. He doesn't have super strength. So he's not protecting New York. He's only focusing on his, I don't know how big Hell's Kitchen is, but it's way smaller than New York in total.
It's quite small.
It's less than a square mile.
And so, so he focuses on his territory and he keeps a watchful eye. His enhanced hearing can reach pretty much all of Hell's Kitchen, but not all of the city or all of the planet. He keeps his abilities in scope, and so he keeps his watch in scope.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Paul, I want to hear from you as well, but kind of just bouncing around it in conversation. I especially like the point you both brought up about sort of where he stands with the law. Mm-hmm. Because as I was rewatching season 1, and we'll talk more about sort of the specific stuff we watched or read this week, one thing I was very struck by is that it seems like a real conflict he goes throughout the season is about, like, will he work within the law or outside the law? And there are times where he's like, I'm going to fix these problems by being a lawyer. And then there's other times where he's like, the law can't help. I have to just go fist these things with my fists or with my iron pipes, which, of course, never will kill people when you hit someone in the head with an iron pipe.
Of course not.
I just signed a contract. I have to mention that every time Daredevil comes up. Now I can move on with my life. But the point being, like, he has that tension. And so I was really struck by, in the last episode where he's talking about how he has to go out and try to fix something, he says to Foggy, "This is the part where law meets reality. Either I put on the mask or we risk losing Hoffman and Fisk wins." And for those who don't remember this, Hoffman is a potential witness.
Yeah.
And to me, that was just such an interesting moment of like synthesis of those two, because he's not saying I have to go like kill Fisk because the law can't deal with him. He's saying I have to work outside the law to make sure that Hoffman can testify so we can get him within the law.
Yeah. So first of all, I think you all bring up really great points. I love the idea of, Matt as, both as this like working class hero who where his perspective is informed by sort of by the structure of society, and then also in terms of knowing his own limits, like, I'm not Superman, I'm not gonna fly. I mean, he doesn't know who Superman is, unless I guess the comics exist within, do DC Marvel comics exist within the Marvel Comics universe, and Marvel comics exist within the DC comics universe?
I've seen Marvel get referenced in DC properties a lot, but I don't know if I've ever seen DC get referenced
in Marvel. Yeah.
Yes.
I
will say that
you're not Superman,
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
right,
that's true. And in Young Justice, I will say my favorite version of this. There's a I think it's like the Terrific 3 or something. There's an episode of Young Justice that's all about like dealing with. No, I'm sorry, not Young Justice. There's an episode of Batman Begins. Batman Beyond. Wow, I really know these things. There's an episode of Batman Beyond where they're basically dealing with a satire of the Fantastic Four.
Oh,
yeah.
They do that all the time in Marvel. Yeah. There's like 5 different versions of the Justice League running around. Most significantly called the Squadron Supreme, and
it's so much fun too, though.
That's awesome.
And they also take little veiled shots at each other. Commonly, in like letter columns and editorial pages, they constantly refer to DC as the distinguished competition.
Nice. But Paul, as you were saying,
so Daredevil's not flying up into the atmosphere and using his enhanced senses to hear all over the planet what's going on. Like, he's in Hell's Kitchen, and I mean, Hell's Kitchen is loud. Like, I grew up in Hell's Kitchen, so you probably can't hear that far beyond it. If you had heightened senses, it would probably be pretty upsetting as a child, right? As it was for little Maddie. But yeah, I think, there's one, what was it? There's, what I read this week was, Zdarsky's, Will recommended volume 14 in Zdarsky's run on Daredevil. I ended up reading volumes 11 through 15 because you can get them all together from the library as one volume, but, or I guess it's issue 14, yeah. Right? So it was volume 3, but it's issue 14, and he's having a conversation with Detective Cole North, who had been apparently Daredevil killed someone, right? And they're talking about like why they do what they do, basically, and Matt, who at this point is saying he's not Daredevil, just says, I can't turn away from the people in need. I just can't. Nobody should. And to me, that kind of sums up the sort of like hero's compulsion that I think a lot of these characters have. Yeah. I just watched a Batman animated movie, and he tries to save someone who'd been killing people and was trying to kill him, and then he tries to save him, and Catwoman's like, you have to do this, don't you? And he's like, I had to try. If someone can be saved, I have to try. And to me, there's often this just like, when you see someone in need, it's like, or you see like Daredevil, like Matt Murdock exists in a really broken world that's very corrupt, and he believes deeply in the idea of the law. But, as you said, and as he said, the reality of the law is often like, yeah, if you have a witness and that witness is going to get murdered, like, then you don't have a witness and you don't have a case. And so he's like, well, I'm just going to do what I can do as Daredevil so that Matt Murdock can actually use the law and not have a bunch of dead witnesses.
Right.
See, I'm not sure he actually believes in the law as an ideology, because he's constantly going around it. He's, being a vigilante and all that. I think he believes in justice as something separate, and the law is effectively one of his superpowers.
Right.
It's a tool for him,
Yeah, I guess what I mean is, I think he believes in the idea of, a world where the law functions the way it says it should.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I definitely don't believe that he believes it does function that way. But, you make a good point that it's maybe more of, a tool than an ideology. I buy that.
Well, and let me use this model, because certainly in the TV show Daredevil, and I think this may be part of what we're exposing, is one way in which the screen and print are different. Although I really love, Steve, what you said about searching for the true Daredevil. The whole point is that there is no such thing, because there's multiple canonical versions, and it's all just about how we see the character with all these different versions. But one of the things that I got out of the TV show Daredevil is that he feels very much to me like the Christopher Nolan Batman. Leaving out the last of the three movies, just in the Batman Begins and Dark Knight. Because what I mean by that is, it seems like he is... both Batman and, as I understand it, Matt Murdock recognize that the police and the law are so corrupt that it cannot do what they should do, but that he has the eventual goal of, going outside the law in order to rebuild the law. Right. Batman very much wants Harvey Dent and Commissioner Gordon to be able to function again as they should. He drops people off at the courthouse. And I saw Matt Murdock kind of doing the same thing. He wants it to be that Fisk can't control the court and the law and the press, so that those things can work without him. So I'm curious for all three of you, A, if you agree with that about the TV version, but also if that is actually fairly different from the on-print version.
I think on the page, it's really just, these characters go through so many iterations and so many different storylines, and a lot of it is about putting them in a situation where different parts of them are tested. So, yeah, I agree that that's, a recurring theme that he is. I think it speaks to what justice means to him, that it's not pure vigilantism, and that there is some sort of community accountability. But if it doesn't function, then it's a much higher slog. But I think there are certainly, adaptations or storylines in which they find a different part to push on that tension, and it might function better or worse or whatever, and his reaction to it might change.
Yeah, I pretty much agree to that.
That makes sense.
I think the idea of justice is actually a really interesting component of this, because ostensibly, on some level, the law is supposed to be about some notion of justice, and people often talk about vigilante justice, right? As this idea, and I think it can often be very problematic. But personally, this might sound weird, but I don't believe in justice. I think justice is an idea that people have that's kind of squishy, and I believe in helping people, and I believe that it's all very subjective, right? What we think of as justice. But I think often when we're thinking about what we want out of the idea of justice, I think often it's not necessarily productive. And I think the idea of kind of just trying to make things better for more people, not turning away from people in need, I think is a little different from justice.
Right.
Absolutely.
You know what I would be really, I haven't seen that I hope will happen one day. So I want someone with a law background to write Daredevil or advise on Daredevil, because I would be interested to see how Matt reacts to going out of his way to save someone so they could be persecuted by the law, and then their punishment being the death sentence.
Wait, did Charles Soule or Soleil, I don't know how to actually pronounce his name, did he never write Daredevil? Because he's a Marvel writer, and he he's a lawyer and owns his own law practice.
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah, he did.
Okay.
Right. He wrote. Damn. Okay.
Because I remember he wrote She-Hulk, and she's also a lawyer.
Yeah. So Soleil's run was just before Zdarsky's current run. But that oh my gosh, that one was dark.
Tell me.
that one focused on for Daredevil stuff. He spent a lot of his time training this new hero, Blind Spot, who developed some stealth tech and helps Daredevil go around. But it was also, that was when Matt became Soul's run had this is when Fisk first becomes mayor, and Fisk hires Matt to be his one of his direct reports, his deputy mayor or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so he does that because he wants Matt Murdock, because Kingpin doesn't know, or Fisk doesn't know, that Matt Murdock is Daredevil and yada yada anymore. It's been revealed and taken away a handful of times. but
comics magic.
He still always has he's always had this history with Murdock, and so he wants to keep Murdock, one, for the public image of he has a lawyer to show that he's being legit, but then also to keep an eye on Murdock to make sure he's not going behind his back to try to sabotage him.
Right.
So Soul's run focused a lot on Matt working in the mayor's office with a Wilson Fisk as the mayor of New York City.
Interesting.
It didn't do a whole lot in the courtroom.
Well, and I wanted just to kind of say one or two more things about the comment, Paul, you were making about justice, and then let's get into more about like what we each watched and read and how it connected to this question. Because I think, Paul, one of the really interesting things you're talking about is, to me, the justice you're talking about especially is like retributive. Yeah,
right.
How's the word? Mm-hmm. Retributive justice. The justice you're really talking about is retributive justice, where it's all about like, this person did something bad and so they deserve this. And at least at least on screen, that's a very big part of Matt Murdock, because it's very much the Catholic part of him. You know, he and the priest are always talking about like, do people like Fisk get what they deserve, and is it, you know, he at one point talks about like, am I God's instrument? Did God make me like this so I can give people what they deserve? So yeah, I think it's really interesting thinking about where is that role of justice for him, that it's about, you know, punishing the bad people, not just stopping bad things from happening.
Speaking of Punisher, what I watched this week was episode 3 of season 2, as well as some other bits, but of the Daredevil Netflix show, where Frank kidnaps Daredevil and has him tied up on on the rooftop, and they have a long conversation that lasts most of the episode.
I love that conversation.
It's great. And I've got some, you know, assorted quotes that I wrote down, where, you know, first Daredevil, and I'll call him Daredevil and I'll call Frank, because at this point Frank isn't like the Punisher. I mean, he is, but he doesn't have like the vest and stuff.
Right.
And he doesn't take off, you know, Daredevil's mask, because like, I don't care who you are, like, you know. But Daredevil's like, you don't have to do this. No one else has to die. You can walk away. And, you know, and Frank's like, walk away? Could you do that? Walk away? You know. And then he's like, we don't get to pick the things that fix us, Red, make us whole. And Daredevil's just like, people don't have to die. I believe it ain't my call, and it ain't yours either. And then later he says, you know, it's up to the law, not me and not you. And so, you know, the idea of like whether or not people should, you know, die for like doing bad things, I think, like in that scene anyway, in that iteration of Daredevil, it seems very clearly like he's like, look, it's not for me to decide. So that's why he doesn't go around killing people. And that's why when he does, I don't know whether I didn't read issue 10, but I don't know if he intentionally killed someone or accidentally killed someone or what exactly happened.
So at the end of Soleil's run, Daredevil gets hit by a truck and his body breaks, and he goes through this rehab process, and the story's called Death of Daredevil, and it's Matt trying to get back into some sort of shape where he can walk again. His body has taken so much damage over the years of being Daredevil that his life was immediately threatened, yada yada yada. He's back outside and he's trying to take the Daredevil mantle back. One of his first times out fighting crime, he accidentally kills somebody.
Okay.
And which leads him down this spiral of like, should I even be Daredevil?
Right. That makes sense. And, I mean, so first of all, I think there's a huge difference between accidentally killing someone while engaging in a violent struggle versus deliberately murdering someone. That's another
one
episode.
of these metal poles that I threw at somebody's head killed somebody for once.
Right. But let's say someone's trying to hit you with a metal pole and you're trying to hit them with a metal pole and you hit them with a metal pole and kill them, you killed them, right? But
Right.
that's more of a manslaughter thing. Whereas you knock the metal pole out of their hand, they're on the ground, and then you decapitate them with a shield. I mean, you hit them with a metal pole and they're skull.
Just to take one random example.
Just a random example. I don't know where that came from, but just totally made up. But the sort of the paradigm I feel in a lot of comic book media is you can hit someone really, really hard and they'll be fine unless you intend to kill them or don't know how to use your powers.
Yeah.
Or the writers want someone to die, basically.
Yep.
There's a moment early in season 1 where he basically throws someone off a roof into a garbage can.
Right.
And Claire is like, "Oh my God, did you kill him?" And he's like, "No, he's in a coma." And I'm not a doctor, but from what I understand, being able to dial the amount of brain trauma and get perfectly on the coma but not death and will recover, that he got lucky.
Yeah.
But I think those are great points you're making, because I think I've always had the sense that is a huge part of his wrestling, is not just, can I do this, but can I do this without killing people?
Right.
Which is, I think, another reason why the Batman connection comes to me. Of it's it's sort of, is the goal to use violence to stop people, or is the goal to use violence to protect people, or to use that violence to be able to serve some other purpose, like the law or the press or whatever it is?
Right.
I think this segues naturally into talking about kind of moving from his motivation to talking about his morals. And I find it really interesting in terms of, when you're talking about, can I do this versus should I do this? We get into the sort of ethics territory. And Daredevil is interesting to me because he's the only hero that I can think of where his ethics are external to him and come to him via his Catholic faith. Most other superheroes, it's a real sort of internal struggle of trying to decide right from wrong. Matt knows right from wrong through, he doesn't question whether to do something because it may or may not be the right thing to do. He questions whether the thing that he is going to do will be a sin. Like in the very first scene of the Netflix show. So my preparation for this, I watched the first 2 episodes of the Netflix show, saw the hallway fight scene, and then immediately went to season 3, episode 4 to watch the prison fight scene.
Yeah.
But and that was it for Netflix. But I also reread the seminal Daredevil story, Born Again, by Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli, and I can talk about that a little bit if people are interested. But it has very little to do, surprisingly, with his motivations or his morals.
Right.
It's a very straightforward kind of story. And so, in the very first scene of the Netflix show, he's in confession with the priest, and he asks for forgiveness. Crucially, not for something. He's not confessing something he's already done. He's asking for forgiveness for something he's about to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was a real illustration of the way that, he doesn't have to grapple or wrestle with right and wrong from an ethical standpoint. He has to basically go through this ritual of penance and sin and atonement, which in a very Catholic fashion is aestheticized through lots and lots and lots of pain, both
Yes.
both from him and the people he's fighting against.
Yeah, I definitely think the Catholicism part is very interesting and also relevant because it's not only that it's an external morality, although I think he does spend quite a lot of time with his priest trying to figure out what's the most moral thing within that framework. Mm-hmm. But I think what's really interesting is, that framework is itself a law. Like my background is in education is theological, and I'm not Catholic, but I studied with a number of Jesuits for quite a while, and they taught like moral law. And
Absolutely.
So I think him being a lawyer, it's very important there that it's the the legal system, but also the Catholic legal system, and figuring out where exactly he falls in that.
Yeah, I think in that example, I think it's particularly telling that of all the justices on the Supreme Court right now, they're all either Catholic or Jewish, which both theologies have a very legal framework towards morality.
Very much so.
And this is, Protestantism is much more an internalized ethics and, your personal relationship with God. I'm also, just going real quick on Daredevil Born Again. First of all, for anyone who hasn't read this before, I highly, highly recommend it. It's so good. It's just, particularly for me as I write comics, and just as a general interest in the comics medium, just absolute masterwork in terms of comics technique for narrative building and storytelling. But at the very beginning, Karen Page, who, because Frank Miller is a horrible misogynist, she's strung out on heroin and making porn movies. Mm-hmm. And she, in order to get her next fix, she trades the one thing she has of information, and it's Daredevil's secret identity. And you watch this piece of information make its way all halfway across the world back to Fisk, and he, within the space of an issue, completely destroys Matt's life. He shuts down Nelson and Murdock. He gets Matt evicted from his home. He just cuts him off from any relationship, strains his friendship with Foggy. Just every single aspect of Matt's life is destroyed, to the point where it gets to the point, and season 3, episode 4 actually had a callback to this, where once he's broken his mental state and his social standing completely, he finds somebody to beat the crap out of him, put him in a taxi with locked doors, drive it off a bridge, with a bottle of liquor in there, and frame his death as a suicide. And then the joke being, well, they never find a body. And so the rest of the trade is him building himself back up, Matt, and then finally taking down Fisk.
Well, and interesting, as you started out by saying this isn't really connected to the moral stuff, but we were just talking about religion. You said it's called Born Again.
Yes.
And that, to me, that's fascinating, because that's very much the idea of being born again is obviously a very religious concept.
Absolutely.
But very much within Protestantism. It's not something you find very often in Catholicism.
That's really true. But it is, I think it's more like a literal resurrection, like it's less about the sort of spiritual born again tradition and more about like his body is almost completely destroyed, and he convalesces with Sister Maggie in the church. And there are a lot of just really conscious allusions to biblical imagery with him in sort of crucifixion-like poses, or La Pieta. And there's a brilliant blog post by comics writer Matt Fraction about the sort of comic studies and compositional techniques that Miller and Mazzucchelli use within these issues to sort of give this its full weight as a piece of sort of symbology towards Catholicism and theology in that sense.
Was season 3 of the Netflix show based at least inspired by that comic?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the Netflix show was. This is
right.
Kind of when you ask somebody what's the one Daredevil comic, they'll point to this, because I don't think it's entirely like it, again from his essential like grounding as a character. It, you know, the one line that you get as to like why does Matt do what he does, which was kind of our jumping off point for this podcast, and the one line is on the very final page. And it's just Matt and Karen walking down the street, and he says, "My name is Matt Murdock. I was blinded by radiation. My remaining senses function with superhuman sharpness. I live in Hell's Kitchen and do my best to keep it clean. That's all you need to know." So it's just a very matter-of-fact statement of like, this is just who I am and what I do. It's
right.
I don't need a reason for this.
Right. It's what I am.
My impression is that, and this is kind of true of a lot of like what the MCU and other on-screen things are doing, but that like the amount of navel gazing that's involved in sort of the Netflix MCU characters, there's some of that in the comics, but a lot of it is kind of the creation of moving it into the Netflix universe. Is that, you think that for both Will and Steve, do you think that's a fairly accurate statement?
Will, you want to go first?
Yeah, I think, yeah. I mean, give me a second to gather.
All right, I'll go first then. I think that it is. I think it's more a situation where they know that these characters are new to the audience and they need to do a little more work establishing them and establishing their sort of their personalities and their moral struggles.
Right.
And also, you know, I don't know if you go back to read equivalent issues on the timeline for the comics, if they'll be having the same sort of conflicts, but a lot of it is sort of genre conventions, and the fact that, you know, in the 60s and 70s, a lot of these stories were more pulpy, and you didn't need to have this as much of a naturalistic reflection on heroes as people. Although that was sort of the innovation of Marvel at the time, as they were had much more interiority and real life personal conflict than, for example, DC heroes.
Right. And I do know that we've been doing with Jessica Plummer, who's another fantastic comic book expert, we've been doing a whole series on comic book history. And one thing we've talked about a lot is that since a lot of these characters came out of the time during the comic book code, which is by the 70s and really fading, but was definitely powerful in the 50s and had some influence in the 60s, you couldn't have relatable villains. Villains had to be just like pure mustache twirly evil, and our heroes had to be pure good. So I can imagine that I know Daredevil kind of comes towards, as that's really fading, but that a lot of our sort of concept today of the relatable villain and the villain who is sympathetic, that just wasn't really a part of the culture when a lot of these characters were first getting created.
And the hero sort of being introspective and not being sure that they were doing was right, instead of just being like, yeah, I just do what's right because I'm the protagonist. That's how, that's the law or the code.
Like, this is a bit of a diversion, but as part of that, I looked back at some of the original X-Men comics. Magneto is not a relatable villain. He's just like mustache twirly with a crazy magnet on his car.
Yeah. They have added and then taken away and then added so much to Magneto over the years.
Definitely. Will, have you been had a chance to bring together your thoughts and share the wisdom?
The wisdom. Yeah, I will say that. So my comic book experience, and I say this like every time I talk about everything I've read, really is only focused on the last like 20 years now. And so maybe like 15 years ago, there's been a bigger push for this whole like get a more in-depth full circle view. Nobody is 100% good, nobody's 100% bad of every character. And I feel like that set up a lot of what we get to see in especially the Netflix shows, like when you get introduced to like Fisk and you see their growth, or like even like Black Mariah and Luke Cage and all that kind of see where they're coming from. And but I also feel like that's kind of the that's what people want these days.
Yeah.
They want to know why they want to dislike this person. It's not enough to just say, well, this person wants to rule the world. They want to know why they want to rule the world now. I don't know.
Right.
Everybody wants to rule the world.
There's a good song about that.
It is true, yeah.
Go ahead, Paul.
I was just going to say one interesting thing about the Zdarsky run that I read part of was how relatable Fisk was also. Despite
right? Oh my
being,
gosh, I forget.
I mean, it's really good. It's really good. Honestly, Matthew, if you're going to read any Daredevil comics, I'd recommend it, because I think the Fisk line is like really, it's just great. And Wesley, and
it's blowing my mind right now.
It's a different Wesley, by the way.
Like a different person, or
a
just
different person also named Wesley. Yeah, there's a Wesley in Born Again, but I looked it up on the wiki. He died.
Right, yeah.
Fisk found himself a different Wesley. This guy, the current guy in Zdarsky's run, his first name is Wesley, whereas the one in Born Again, his name is like,
the last name is something Wesley.
Yeah.
Okay, that's funny.
Yeah, I was losing my mind on this volume when Steve and I were talking about it, with like Daredevil's arc is interesting, but I'm so in love with Fisk's arc. And
so tell us about it for those who haven't read it.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So this is Fisk. So everyone knows Wilson Fisk as the kingpin of crime, and everything is in the shadows and everything is shady, and it's all backdoor deals and all this other kind of stuff, black market stuff. And so as he has gotten his way into public office, and now he's the mayor of New York City, he has this pride, and he holds kind of the mayor on a pedestal as far as like, I'm the mayor, you should listen to me now. Mm-hmm. And he's trying to do everything by the book and in the spotlight now. And so there's a difference, but then in this volume, the third volume of Zdarsky's Daredevil, we get introduced to the people who are above the office, in a sense. The people, like, if it turns out that so like the Jeff Bezoses of the world and stuff that are involved in New York, and the people who have quote unquote the real money and the real power in New York, and the mayor of New York City now gets invited to this house and this lunch with the other power players that are the power players in the spotlights and in the day. And he finds out within that one lunch how out of his own depths he actually is. And
interesting.
Yeah, and it's wild.
He's all insecure.
And this is the first time, with the exception of a Marvel Max Kingpin origin run that I've read, that you actually see Wilson like break. Yeah. And he like actually feels in over his head. He had a moment of weakness, like, where he falls back into his like crime crime boss days and did that approach, and then he snaps out of it and he's like, that is not what it was supposed to happen. And it's him reeling from that. How do you cover that up? How do you deal with it? And then how do you face the power players that you just met, then you've been trying to impress to get into their good graces, because you can't do it the same way you used to. It's like, I don't want to give anything away because I want people to read it, but it is so much fun.
Oh, it's
confirmed.
It sounds amazing, and I think in the TV show, and I'll get more into that in season 1 because that's what I really focused on this last week. But his insecurity is such a big part of it, and his sense of like even just the conversations with Nobu and Madame Gao, you can tell like he's a little out of his, like he's a very big fish in the small pond of Hell's Kitchen, but in terms of this like supernatural stuff or the larger things happening, he has no idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Fisk in the Netflix is it's weird to say, but he's more controlled. Like one of the things, this is kind of a tangent, but one of the things that I love about Doctor Doom so much is he knows where he stops. Like he knows how far his reach can get. And when
if he sees a plan going haywire, he'll abort it. He'll abort it before it actually puts him in any risk.
Exactly. Right. He sees where it's going to fall apart, and if it's going to end there, if it's not going to end well, then he's like, okay, I'm out. I have other things to do anyway. I'm going to go do that. And I see a lot of that approach in the D'Onofrio Kingpin Fisk, and where he's more calculated. He's taking his time, and a lot of the Kingpin's origin is that where he worked his way up through the mafia, and he saw where he wanted to go, and he put things in place to get there. But you only see that in flashbacks, because every time we're introduced or we see Kingpin, it's already at the height of his power, and so he's got this ego. Right. And so when you get to see a Wilson Fisk on Netflix kind of move up and become the Kingpin, that's when you really get to see, like, okay, he's calculated, he's got a vision, he's gonna go and execute it. He knows what he wants.
Well, it's interesting though, because I'm going to talk a lot more about Fisk when I get to the stuff I watched, but one thing that I definitely got out of it was I think season 1 of Daredevil is as much his origin story as Matt Murdock's.
Absolutely.
Because part of it is, throughout the course of the season, he is slowly losing control. Mm-hmm. At the start, he's got this great team, and then he has to kill the Russians, then he has to kill Nobu, and then Madame Gao leaves, and his mother is no longer in safety, and Vanessa has to go away, and he has to start like killing people directly, and his anger at Daredevil at the end is that, like, I had this great plan and you ruined everything. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things I love about it is we get to see him being like less and less and less in control. Up to the point of, I don't know much about Kingpin, especially not from the comic books, but I have, you see him in Into the Spider-Verse, which is a very different kind of Kingpin, but still a great character. But also in the Spider-Man video game, I'm calling it kind of a deep cut here, but in the Spider-Man video game, the first person you fight in kind of the prologue to that game is Kingpin, because the whole game is about a world in which Kingpin's in jail. But so you fight Kingpin in that early fight, and his like signature move in the fight is to put his head down and like charge at you. And I don't know if that's a signature move in the comic books. I'm guessing it is, because it's only after he's had this like major awareness of who he is and really accepted the Kingpin. In the fight he has with Daredevil, he keeps putting his head down and charging right at Daredevil. And I was like, I've seen you do that move. I saw you do that move in the video game.
This goes straight into the sort of the portrayal of Fisk in Born Again too, because he gets so upset and obsessed with killing Murdock after it turns out he can't find the body, that he ends up getting somebody to find Nuke, aka Simpson from the Jessica Jones show, and has him operate with flamethrower and a rocket launcher and a machine gun right in the middle of Hell's Kitchen.
Real subtle.
And just starts blowing things up. And it's the Avengers come, after a long fight, the Avengers come to sort of finish it all off. And then Captain America is, freaks out because this is a guy who's wearing the American flag and goes and hacks the government, which you can do, very easy, and finds out, kind of connects it back to Fisk, and that's what sort of takes Kingpin down after a climactic fight between Fisk and Daredevil as well, and it is this sort of overreach, doesn't know when to stop, both in a physical sense and in a sort of metaphorical sense.
Right. Well, and so this is actually a good time for me to I've been referencing it a lot, but let me just kind of go into more what I watched for what I watched leading up to this episode, because I just did a deep dive into season 1. At first I was like, I'm going to watch episode 1, get some of the setup, and I'll watch the episode 2 till the hallway fight scene. And I was like, well, you know what? I don't know exactly. And then I wanted to watch his scenes with the Catholic priest, and I didn't know exactly where those were, so I'll just watch all of season 1. But one thing I was very struck by was how much Matt Murdock's story and the questions he's wrestling with are the exact same as Fisk's, And you can go all the way back to, both of them have this very traumatic experience of their father's death, though obviously in very different ways. But throughout the course of the story, both of them, I think truly Fisk wants to make the city a better place. And in many ways, for both of them, it's motivated by what happened to their father. Matt doesn't want his father to be killed. Matt doesn't want more people to lose their father to the criminal underworld that his father died to. Fisk doesn't want more people he doesn't want more kids to be abused by a father like he was. But either way, they both have this fundamentally altruistic, I want to make the city a better place. And they're both willing to go outside the law in order to do that. Mm-hmm. Fisk, obviously, to a much greater extent, and Fisk doesn't have the same compunctions about murder. But both of them see... Go ahead.
Sorry, I think there's a slight distinction that's necessary. I think Fisk wants to make the city a better place for him, and Daredevil wants to make the city a better place for his neighbors.
I think Fisk wants to make the better... I think... Well, are you saying that's mostly from the comic? Because in Netflix, my sense
this is looking at Netflix. Sorry. Okay.
No.
Apologies.
Well, no, but that's actually a helpful thing, is because I think, and that's kind of what I'm going to get to, is that I think in the show, at least, Fisk says he wants to make it better for other people, so they don't have to go through what he did, and the blending there is very legit, because the point that I'm getting to is that I feel for both of them, they're not sure if they're monsters. Murdock goes to the priest and says, am I doing the wrong thing? Is this what God wants me to do? Fisk goes to, Vanessa and says, am I a monster? Was I wrong to kill my dad? Am I wrong to do these things? And Vanessa kind of plays a similar role to Fisk as the priest does for Matt. And then, of course, by the time the show ends, they've each kind of accepted who they really are, with Matt accepting that he's the hero, and with Fisk giving that amazing ill intent speech that just accepting I am a villain and that's who I am.
Yeah.
But to me, the thing that's most interesting about it is there's this tension throughout of them realizing that they're both very smart and they're both very able to justify things to themselves. And I feel like that's one of my favorite quotes in the whole season, I think for many people, is this quote from the priest when he says to Matt, when Matt's saying, I don't want to have to kill him, but I think I do. There's a wide gulf between inaction and murder, Matthew. Another man's evil does not make you good. Men have used the atrocities of their enemies to justify their own throughout history. So the question you have to ask yourself is, are you struggling because you don't want to kill this man but feel you have to, or that you don't have to kill him but want to? And to me, that last question is so essential, but I focus actually even more on the earlier part of it, which is, men have used the atrocities of their enemies to justify their own throughout history.
Absolutely.
Because I think that's the biggest place they differ, at least in the show, is Fisk is able to say, my father did these terrible things, I have to do the terrible things to stop them. Matt is able to kind of stop himself and say, I know that there's a self-righteousness of killing the bad people, but he's able to stop himself.
Right. That's a great point. It's also a callback to season 1, episode 2, where Matt and Claire are up on a roof, and he with this the Russian guy who he later drops off the roof. And
very accurately into a dumpster. Very accurately.
He also earlier dropped a fire hydrant on the guy's head from 8 stories up or something.
Extinguisher, yeah.
Yeah, fire extinguisher,
Traumatic brain injury just does not exist in this world, and we just have to...
Right. Moderate brain injuries are just very popular.
But right after giving another line, which I was obsessed with, where she says, I find a guy in a dumpster who can do all this really weird shit, like smell cologne. Oh, I'm sorry. Is this a family podcast?
No. You can curse a little bit. We're fine.
Okay. Like smell cologne through walls and sense whether someone's unconscious or faking it. Slap on top of that, he can take an unbelievable amount of punishment without one complaint. And Matt says, well, that last part's Catholicism. But right after that, so again, the aestheticization of pain and the, the sort of Catholic penance and redemption. But right after that, he's torturing the guy, and he says, I enjoy this, basically.
Yeah. I should have written down, I need you to know why I'm hurting you.
Right.
It's not just... Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm saying something different. So you keep going ahead.
I didn't have the exact quote written down, but it's something very, very much along those lines. And Claire, stops him afterwards and says, "I didn't believe that part where you said that you enjoy this."
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really, really crucial line in trying to parse his ethics and his motivations.
Right. Yeah, I think so, because I think. My sense is that there is a part of him that thinks he could enjoy it, but that he also doesn't. But it's more so that kind of do I have to do this or not?
Yeah. So I've got a whole bunch of things I want to respond to that you all just said.
I kind of gave a 10-minute speech, so go ahead.
Yeah. No, I agree with most of what everybody's been saying. But the one thing I want to. What were you just saying?
Me or Steve?
First. Both.
About enjoying.
Yeah. So basically, hitting people can be fun until they're hurt, right. And then it's it can not be fun. But I mean, it can be different for different people, obviously. That probably could have come out differently. But...
You sound like you're speaking from experience.
I am.
Paul is a martial artist. He's not a street mugger. Just to be clear what we're talking about.
I spent decades learning, to fight in a controlled circumstance where nobody's supposed to get injured. But sometimes people do. And it can be very upsetting. But there's also sometimes kicking people in the head is fun, and it's when it's a game, right? But then when they're bleeding out of their face, it's oh, this is not fun. Mm-hmm. But it's they're, there's the phrase earlier in the season and throughout where, Matt talks about letting the devil out, basically, right. And that to me, it seems it's this kind of zone he gets into, where that's a part of him. And it's not he's oh, I want to go beat someone up because I want to, but because there's kind of something inside of him that, does enjoy the violence on some level, which is different from enjoying the injuries that people get, and so I think there's a lot there with that. And Claire says, I think she says something I wouldn't be helping you if I did believe, that you enjoyed it. Mm-hmm. And I think that informs a lot about her motivations as well. In terms of Fisk's motivations, I grew up in Hell's Kitchen in the 80s and lived there until 2010. And when I was born, Hell's Kitchen basically got the name Hell's Kitchen. Not because I was born, but like around the same time.
Paul's Kitchen, aka Hell.
Exactly. And like I lived in this building that had a bunch of performing artists. It was subsidized for performing artists. It was like these 2 towers with a plaza and like a lot of security, and it felt like this very safe little village in this very dangerous neighborhood, right? Like West Side Story was set in Hell's Kitchen, and the idea is like that there were these gangs from different groups, and then they were fighting, and there was a lot of drugs and prostitution, and not that there's necessarily anything wrong with that in and of itself, but there's when they're illegal, then there's a lot of crime, often violent crime that goes along with that. And in my lifetime, like starting in the 90s and then going through the aughts, the neighborhood became very gentrified.
Right. And,
gradually, but to the point where when I thought about moving back there in like 2012, I think, I looked at an apartment that was like, it was like $2,000 a month, and it was like a large walk-in closet was like the whole apartment, and there were 70 people online to look at this open house where they were like, and it was like a 5th floor walk up too. It was like all the thing, and there was no air conditioning. You'd have to like put the unit in the window, and I was just like, what happened to this place? And it's just a very interesting experience. And so watching Daredevil, like that's what Daredevil season 1 is about, right?
And it's about a gentrification process that's really already happened. Like the Mrs. Cardanias can't afford to live in Hell's Kitchen by the time that show is being shot.
Right. So you mean that's already happened in real life or in the show?
In real life.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So the Hell's Kitchen of the Daredevil TV show is Hell's Kitchen of the 80s and the 70s and the 60s.
Right.
It's not as it is today. And they kind of lampshade it. They're like, oh yeah, like, there was the big battle and the Avengers and aliens and stuff got blown up. So, that's kind of part of why it's how it is. But like in the MCU or in the Netflix MCU, there was never the gentrification that took place in the 90s is kind of my feeling, right? And what Fisk is doing is he like wants to do that. He wants to like, I don't think he, in the series, wants to make it better specifically just for himself. I think he wants to make it better for people with money. I think he wants to make it better for some people, whereas Matt wants to make it better for the people who already live there, for the people who call it home, for the people whose neighborhood it is. Yeah. And, I think that's a really interesting conflict because it's a very real world one. Like, in the 90s and the aughts and, like, now, like, you can walk around Hell's Kitchen feeling safer, probably, than you did in the 80s or the 70s. Like, I miss my bus stop, I get off the bus, and there's a dude with this, like, plastic baggie just filled with crack vials just in his hand, like, walking in front of me. I'm like, okay. And, like, I literally, as a 10-year-old, got offered to buy knives, by people on the street.
When I first went over to your house when we were friends in high school, my father was really worried. He was like, I don't want you to go to that neighborhood alone.
Yeah. That was like 94, right? Yeah. So there are aspects of gentrification where we're like, well, for some people, this is going to be a more pleasant experience. But for other people, like, they can't afford to live in their homes anymore. And Fisk is like, whatever, I don't care about those people. I care about the people with money and building something that, that will look nice on the outside. And if you can afford it, can be nice. Right. But, everybody else be damned, basically. And to me, that's what makes him a villain, aside from his methods, is that, like, he's very classist, which is funny because he grew up, like, not rich or anything, but I think he bought into the kind of whole meritocracy, everything. Mm-hmm. Okay, end rant on gentrification.
No, it's a great point that they're able to make, Michael Bloomberg or Rudy Giuliani, the arch villain.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it feels like he's Giuliani, honestly, because he was the one who kind of initiated all of that, and then definitely, then Bloomberg continued.
And I think that there's something, like, I think I would just argue just a bit that I think Fisk genuinely believes that he is helping the people who live in the tenements that he's offering to buy them out and move them out. I think. And but then it gets into the thing like the priest said of, it is very easy to convince yourself that you're helping when you're really not. And that I think that's the difference, is that Matt lives with those people. Matt listens to those people. Matt actually knows what they want, whereas Fisk has this much more paternalistic, like, oh, I know what's best. I am sure that that she doesn't want to live in this building with all this criminal element. I should just help her move out so that Nobu can do whatever the hell he's going to do. That kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, he dig up some dragon bones and achieve immortality.
I'm sorry, total divergence, but the show made me so angry watching Mrs. Gao be such an incredible character and knowing how much she gets misused in later shows.
Oh, yeah.
For real.
Yeah, Madame Gao's so good in Daredevil, and, she's in the other series, too.
I also want to circle... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I just had a question for Will, whether this same sort of... classist vision of Fisk is present in his current mayoral run in the comics.
Oh, that's interesting.
No, not
okay.
all.
You say he's kind of working with the real billionaires and the movers and shakers and the people with controlling interests.
We haven't seen what his goal is with meeting those movers and shakers.
Right.
Okay.
It got that entire plot got sidetracked by him losing his cool.
Sure.
Right.
And then him having to deal with the repercussions from those movers and shakers for losing his cool. So, because the way it's framed is, he's going to go meet the bigwigs, and his goal is to impress them. And so we don't know, where he's going to go after that. Most of his for those wondering how Fisk could have even become mayor, there was
just look at our own world. No.
Well, yeah, absolutely. So for those 4 years ago, we're just how the heck could Fisk have possibly become the mayor of New York City? There's a storyline called Secret Empire. And Manhattan gets enclosed in a giant dark force dimension bubble. No in and out, and everything is super dark. And Fisk is going around and using his influence. This is before he's a mayor, so he's using his underground influence to go and save the people of New York and keep the baddies off of them, give them food and water, give them light, give them shelter. And every single time he does this, he tells the people he helps, remember who helped you today. Because it's never any of the heroes, it was me. Remember who helped you, remember who helped you. So after the storyline ends and the force and the Dark Force dome goes away, he enters as a last minute candidate for the mayoral run, and everyone's like, wait, he helped us. Vote. And so using their short-term memories, they all vote for Fisk. So Fisk, as the mayor, is a man of the people, publicly. So the whole the gentrification idea isn't necessarily present because he is his stance. Most of the stuff he's been doing is, I want to keep the people safe, and so he's been doing an anti-vigilante run.
Okay.
Because every time a superhero gets involved, property is destroyed, and someone gets evicted for weeks before damage control can rebuild their apartment, kind of a thing. So
I really wonder what renter's insurance is like in the New York City mall. Property damage insurance. If Thor destroys something, is it actually literally an act of God from an insurance standpoint?
Right. There's act of God, and then there's act of a God. That would be two different clauses in your insurance coverage because they love to get all legalese about it.
Is this just an alien who was worshipped by humans that we're talking about, or something that we can't explain?
So that would actually be a great other show, is to have a TV show about an interest in insurance appraiser. Just living in this world trying to go through these kind of things.
Very niche. Oh, yeah, no, that's a good,
So here's a question I have for all three of you, and especially for Will and Steve. The other theme that I really picked up on more this time I was watching the first season that I hadn't picked up on as much before is how much this idea of being the devil or the devil is so significant to this show. You know, and that obviously it's part of the name that Murdock claims by the end. But like one of his first conversations with the priest is about whether or not they believe that the devil exists. And one of the things I find really striking is, and this is something that I mean, I will do podcasts about theology all day, and I'm not going to try and go too far into that, but one of the conversations that often comes up when people talk about theologies of the devil is that one of the dangers is that once you say this person is the devil, once you say like these people are working for the devil, then you get back into that thing the priest warned about of anything is justifiable to stop them because they're literally the very embodiment of supernatural evil. And what I love is that there's that scene, but that there's then a scene where Matt goes and talks to Vanessa, and it's a super awkward scene. I think one of the worst written in the show. I hate it for that reason. But even putting that aside, he talks later to his priest and says, you know, I realize that this woman has such genuine love for him. And can a man be the devil if someone loves him? Like he sort of he sees the humanity of Fisk. Right. And to me, there's just such a connection between like labeling someone the devil, seeing someone can't really be just the devil because they're just a human being anyway, to then talking about the devil in himself. And then Paul, as you were saying, like accepting that part of him. Is that wrestling with sort of this idea of the devil as both a theological concept in Catholicism, but also in terms of how it marks good and evil and who he is himself? Is that a part of his story at all in the comics, or is that all from the show?
Well, it's not really a part in the comics, primarily because in the comics we have an actual devil.
Morpheus, we
Several
finally
of them,
found Morpheus.
We have multiple interpretations and realms of hell, and they all have their lords of hell, of each of those hells. The most
Mephisto being the most direct.
Yeah, and then we've got Mephisto, who is your classic interpretation of what the devil is. And because we actually have a devil, there isn't necessarily this conversation that Matt struggles with of viewing somebody as the devil because he knows that Mephisto is just over there.
You're right. The metaphorical concept. Paul and I were talking about this before, about how, like, to me, like, in a fantasy world, when the gods become real people, like, when the gods exist as characters, it's not religion in the way we think of today. Like, religion today is very much about the mystery of language for that which is unseen and unknown. Once the devil exists, that no longer works as a metaphorical concept of evil and humanity.
Yeah. So they, like... And I think how they deal with that is then it becomes a question of right and wrong versus who is the devil and what's evil kind of a thing.
Right.
I don't know. There isn't a easy answer other than no, Matt does not view others as the devil because he's punched the devil.
Oh, he actually has come into contact with Mephisto himself.
Oh, yeah. Almost every hero in Marvel has dealt with Mephisto to some degree.
Okay. Yeah, that does change the theological concept of it for sure.
It's like, do you believe in the literal devil? Yes, I punched him in the face.
Yeah, it's
the whole trope of sympathy for the devil, sympathy for Mephisto, no.
Yeah. Well, and then one of this related question to what I was talking about before is this idea of there being parallels between Matt and Fisk and them wrestling with similar questions, but then going and finding different answers. Is that also at all in the comics, or is that also just created for the show?
Well, I think they are shown as opposites primarily because Kingpin, as a character, is an easy opposite for both the lawyer Matt Murdock and the vigilante Daredevil,
right?
As Wilson Fisk and as Kingpin.
And also Matt as a working class hero versus this sort of, rich overlord of crime.
Yeah. So, it's never like explicitly shown, but like Kingpin, because Kingpin was originally a Spider-Man villain. And so he kind of ended up getting adopted into Daredevil because it just fit better. For lack of a real explanation. And so like they're natural opposites of same side of the coin kind of a thing, but it's never explicitly gone into that much of a like let's show the parallels between each other kind of thing.
Yeah, I feel like if it were to happen at any point, it would probably be happening right now because, to my knowledge, they've never really given Kingpin the sort of run as a character and the amount of screen time and interiority, or page time and interiority in the comics as they did in the Netflix show, except for right now, with this mayoral run.
Yes,
I feel like what I just read, though, like not to contradict, but just to say that there were parallels, right? Like like Matt is messed up and kind of trying to figure out who he wants to be after losing control. Maybe it wasn't control like anger control, but like he didn't do things the way he wanted to do them as Daredevil, and so he stopped being Daredevil. And he's questioning himself the whole time. And meanwhile, Fisk is going to try and do things differently, goes a little bit sideways. And I feel he's kind of questioning himself in the same way in terms of like, I'm going to try and do things a different way, but sort of, is it working? I don't know. I guess I didn't finish the series. I guess it's ongoing. Are those, is that recent? That's a recent?
Yeah. So that volume 3 just came out. Just end of last year, I think.
Oh wow, okay, cool. Yeah, so it feels to me like they're not playing with parallels with the like super clear in your face way that especially season 1 of Daredevil does in the Netflix show, but that there are kind of parallels you can draw and similarities to their stories. And Fisk does get, I guess, a lot more page time here than in previous stories.
Yep.
And is presented more like a character with, like, we hear his internal monologue.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. We just almost never have gotten that, before these last couple years.
I wonder if
and
that's
I think
a bit
that
of...
was inspired by the show in a large part, and D'Onofrio's performance.
Yeah, because that's the other question here is we're always talking about how the comic come first and how do they influence what's on screen. But now the stuff's been on screen long enough that I'm sure it's being reversed, and now the comics are being influenced by what's happening on screen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's popular enough too. I mean, the actual readership of these comics is quite small, and they're always looking for new readers, and a lot of that means keeping concepts relatable and characters relatable to audiences who experience them first in adaptation.
Right. Have you seen that? This is a totally off-topic question, but just a quick curiosity. Is that happening with the look of these characters? Like, is Thor looking more and more like Chris Hemsworth, or Captain America looking more like Steve Rogers?
Will hates this.
It bugs me so much. It's so unfair that it bugs me this much because like it's life. It's what sells. I get it, but the biggest influence has been Guardians of the Galaxy.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
They made, so when Chris Pratt became Star-Lord, they completely redesigned him. They gave him a completely different personality. He was the stoic type. He had short, dark brown hair. He was like this jaded, angry man. And then Guardians happened, and now he's this trench coat wearing, happy-go-lucky, let me go date Kitty Pryde from across the galaxy. He was became a completely different person, and they did that with Drax. They didn't really do it with Groot or Rocket, but the biggest MCU impact was that they changed the colors of the Infinity Stones from the comics.
Oh, weird.
And then just like a couple years ago, they changed the colors in the comics to match the MCU. Mm-hmm. And even the characters are like, wasn't this green before? And they're like, yeah, I don't know what happened. That's so strange. Like, they all acknowledge it, but no one asks why. And it's just
funny.
None of this bothers me at all.
I know.
I want to put this on record that I think that it's if you find something that works, stick with it. There's no primacy over the comics. Just go for good stories.
Yeah. I like what happens the reverse, like the moment of Luke Cage looking at his blaxploitation outfits from the early 70s comics and being like, that's not it,
Right, yeah. The little homages, like when just making Jessica dress up as Jewel for a scene. Yeah. It's hilarious. It's great.
So I think we're about ready to... let me start that again. So we've gone on pretty long here. Is there any kind of last things any of you all wanted to add to the conversation? I'm sure there's much more we could say, but kind of just give a chance for if people want to bring up one last point or make one last question.
I have one real quick thing, and that is, it's interesting to me that Daredevil's disability didn't factor into our conversation at all, because it seems like that would be a larger part of his story and sort of the essential part of his character, but it doesn't fit into his ethics. It doesn't fit into his motivation. It mostly serves as kind of an overwrought metaphor for the blindness of justice,
right.
But also as sort of scaffolding for his powers and this sort of, super cripple trope that I've seen, friends of mine who are disabled and disability activists have commented on before. Where and it's he's not fighting to make Fisk install wheelchair ramps in any of his properties, right? This doesn't inform anything about the character other than give him superpowers. On the other hand, in the comics, it makes for a fascinating aesthetic challenge and opportunity, depicting Matt's sensory perceptions, his non-visual sensory perceptions in a visual medium.
Oh, I can see that. That sounds interesting.
I'm thinking specifically of
Mark Wade's.
Mark Wade and Chris Samney's run did as incredible a job on this as I've ever seen. And you have like a 2-page spread where Foggy and Matt, I actually have this as one of my computer backgrounds that cycle through because I am just so obsessed with this image. It's a 2-page spread where they're walking, just crossing a crosswalk in New York and just kind of commenting on what's going around. And, ostensibly Foggy's leading Matt, although he doesn't need it. And he's kind of saying like, oh, turn here. There's an open basement grating or whatever, and you see an inset panel of that open manhole grating, whatever, but it's in the sort of wireframes of his radar sense. And he's like, oh, I want to turn here to follow the girl with the tea tree oil shampoo. And then in a completely different color style, you see an inset panel of the girl's hair, and it's sort of denoting smell as the sense that's operating here.
That sounds very cool.
And then another one and then Foggy says, not the girl window shopping over there, and he says, no, she's got a smoker's cough, and then another color scheme to denote that awesome. It's his hearing and she's coughing, and just there's another one covered by Paulo Rivera where it's all of the sounds of the city. And it's the whole cover, all of the, instead of colors, it's all in black and white. And the line work, kind of the shapes contain the sound that thing is making, written in letters. So it's like, there's a bird and the wings say flap, flap. And there's, a water tower and it says, it's written like whoosh on it and stuff. It's just like unbelievable. The car going by, it says honk on it. It's just like
that's great.
All of these different ways to depict blindness within a visual medium is just unbelievably cool to me. And I also want to shout out that there are efforts out there, people making comics accessible to blind people, and you can go and look up sort of comics for blind people, and there's all sorts of like visual comics, tactile and texture comics, and audio comics, just different ways to make the comics medium accessible to blind people, and I think that is super, super cool.
Right.
I would love to see Daredevil adapted in that medium.
Well, I definitely. So I think it's a great point you raised, and I think you spoke to some of my thoughts on it as well. And it's a topic I've commented on at length on this podcast. So I'll make a kind of last quick comment about it. But Will or Paul, do you want to jump in at all about that? About sort of his disability in terms of this conversation of why he becomes a hero?
Yeah, I guess I don't have that many thoughts on that specifically. Partially because I do think it's the sort of like, you know, his powers offset that in a way that, you know, the extent to which his disability functions as a disability is, I guess, reduced. I don't know. Or in terms of just the way he is, you know, out in the world. What I will say is that I feel the TV show is one of the most well, like, done shows I've seen in terms of sound design, sound editing. They really did, like, sometimes specifically just, you know, the heartbeats and stuff like that. We hear something scraping on the ground. We hear things kind of more the way Matt hears them. But also just all the time, I feel the sound is so deliberate, so crisp. And, I mean, the music's also amazing. But it just... There's a level of attention to detail when it comes to sound that you don't always get, you know, with every show. And also, I remember when it first came out, and, you know, they have this show with a blind protagonist, and they didn't have the, you know, audio descriptive version right away, but I think they got that up really fast, and I think it was the first Netflix show to have an audio descriptive channel, so you could listen to the show with that.
Right.
And I thought that was cool that they did that, and now a lot of shows have that on Netflix, at least.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
I would just say, as someone who I'm not blind, but I am disabled, and I definitely see it through the lens that you mentioned, the phrase, and just to make people clear, we're not. This is a phrase that disabled people use to describe this trope of the super cripple, because the idea is that it's the person who ostensibly has a disability, but then their superpowers allow them to compensate for it so dramatically that a disabled person's probably not going to see anything they can relate to in that example. And I do think, I think part of why it doesn't, kind of what you said, Paul, like, you don't think about his disability much because it doesn't actually affect his character that much. It doesn't seem like. And so for me, like, when you compare that to, say, Toph Beifong from Avatar: The Last Airbender, which I think is and I've heard from many blind activists and blind friends of mine, like, that is a very powerful representation, because her blindness does affect her and limit her, but then she uses her powers to compensate and change for that. So I think that's, for me, I think that's why I've not much connected to it. And I know I talked to, when the show first came out, I was very involved in some disability politics things, and kind of this question came up, and a number of the blind activists I talked about were saying, well, yeah, like, Daredevil's never been a character we cared about, because if there's ever been a medium that is, like, less accessible for blind people than comic books, it's hard to find. You know, which is not it's still a great way to tell the story, but just that it was coming up. And therefore I think what you're saying, Steve, about the ability to have kind of like Braille comic books, or comic books where there's descriptions of the graphics and things like that, is super accessible and super important. And I do like that Netflix did that. But yeah, I think that's, for me, why there have definitely been disabled characters where I think I or other disabled folks can often relate to it. And to be clear, also, like, there's no one voice of any community. I'm sure there have been some blind people or other disabled people who could really relate to Matt Murdock, and I think that's fantastic. But I think that's why, for me, it doesn't feel like a part of the character discussed, because it isn't a part of a disabled experience that I can resonate with in any way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I'm kind of in the same boat as Paul. Is like, I feel bad that when I think of disabled superheroes, Daredevil isn't the first one that comes to mind. And that is kind of odd to say. But, 'cause, like, for whatever reason, I feel like it's because it's like, oh, hey, did you know? I think of Hawkeye before I think of Daredevil, because Hawkeye is partially deaf and he wears a hearing aid. And
in the comics, it's not
in the comics. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, in the comics.
A point people are very frustrated about. But yeah, go on.
And it's like never brought up, and then until they want it to be part of the story that they're telling. But like that comes to mind, and then I think of Echo, Maya Lopez. She's deaf, and she has photographic reflexes like Taskmaster, who people will see in Black Widow when it comes out. And I don't know if he has photographic reflexes in it. I haven't watched anything. But she has photographic reflexes, and she compensates for whatever, for lack of a better term, by reading people's lips. And and that's how she like listens to you speak. And so she hates teaming up with people who wear masks because she can't tell what's going on. And so there always has to be someone with their like mouth showing to coordinate with Echo on what they need to do next. And so I think of Hawkeye and Echo before I think of Daredevil, and I think a lot of it is because Daredevil has this amazing radar sense that more than compensates for having no sight. Like he can his enhanced abilities he can use his fingertips to read a newspaper because he can feel the change in the ink on the paper.
Yeah.
Like,
and to me that's a perfect example. Like Toph Beifong, a running joke is that she can see so well many things, but when people hold something up for her to look at, she's like, "You idiots! I can't read that. What are you talking about?"
Right?
Yeah,
exactly.
She can sense like movement of people around and stuff, and she can read kind of structures, but she can't read ink. She can't. And if she's say on a sky bison in the sky, like her manner of compensating doesn't function in that way.
Right?
So.
Exactly. All right, well, folks, this has been a fantastic conversation. I think there's so much more we could go into, but we're now pushing the 90-minute mark, which I think is about where we really try to keep a limit on. But yeah, I mean, you get 4 people with a lot of ideas. This is going to happen. But I think
Matthew.
No, this is great.
Our fault.
We're definitely
our pods always go long.
As I've joked at the beginning, since the 4 of us started chatting, that I think maybe sometimes where 1 or 2 or 2 of us or 3 of us get together can also be a good thing. Speaking as the person who has to edit now this 4-track audio, but I also think this was great. It was a great conversation. So, Will and Steve, for people who are hearing you guys for the first time, or maybe Steve especially hearing for the first time, and want to know more about like your podcast and where they can find you, let them know what they need to know.
Steve, it's your first time here. I'm gonna let you introduce.
Oh, thanks, bud. Yeah, we have a podcast called Hype is My Superpower. You can find it on Apple, iTunes, Google, Spotify, everything. Anywhere you like to listen to podcasts, that's where it is. Go listen to us. We talk about whatever comics we've read in the last week, and it's kind of a storytelling / book club podcast. Mostly we just we hang out and try and make each other laugh.
Yeah, Steve blew my mind on our last episode. I'm still reeling from it.
Oh, good. Yeah, I don't ever want you to get better. And then I also write comics, as I mentioned before. If you're interested, it's called The Prose. You can find it at theprosecomic.com. Anything else you want to plug, Will?
No, go and find us on our socials. Ask us some questions. We'll reply to you and listen. And then you have to listen to our pod to see when we answer your questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how they get you.
And I will say, I'm not a comic book reader. And often when people are talking about a story that I haven't read, it's just, I'm shut out of the conversation for good reason. And so I just turn it off. You all do a great job of explaining enough of the story that I can follow along and be a part of the conversation, which I really appreciate because it makes it an interesting conversation. It also means I don't ever have to actually read the comic book. I just, get it from you all. So yeah, there's a great podcast. Definitely check it out. I'll have the show notes in the show notes. I'll have a link to that podcast as well as the stuff Steve's doing. And of course, Paul, thank you as always for being a great guest. Paul does writings and videos and stuff that you can find by searching for Zen Madman on Twitter, places like that. So definitely check that out. And of course, this podcast is part of the Stranded Panda Podcast Network. So on that network, you can find great podcasts about the MCU, Star Wars, Star Trek, so many other great topics. There's a podcast called Animation Deliberation. They do all sorts of great stuff about animation. They've done a great thing, a great run on Invincible, which is a great show that came out on Amazon, based in a comic book. Very worth checking out their coverage. And they and I are going to record an episode. They and I have just recorded an episode. One more time. They and I recorded an episode on Invincible that will probably be out on Superhero Ethics by now, by the time you're hearing this one, but definitely worth check that out. And I'm currently in the midst of doing episodes with them jointly about The Bad Batch on my Star Wars Universe podcast. We're doing that kind of in concert together because it's Star Wars and it's animation. And then we also have guests like Paul, Sarah Hayashi, and Brian V. Klein, all of whom have been part of that. So check all that out. And if you want to give feedback for this episode or any of the stuff that I do, it's all under The Ethical Panda. So you can go to theethicalpanda.com to find all the podcasts I'm a part of. You can find us on Facebook or Twitter by searching for The Ethical Panda, or you can email us at theethicalpanda@gmail.com. There's so many great conversations we started here. Would love to hear your thoughts. Love to hear what you think, seeing the comics and the show, how it influences you. So please reach out. Let us know. So on behalf of myself, Will, Steve, Paul, thank you all so much, and have a great day.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.